The following presentation is brought to you by Discovery Education, leading the world of digital and video learning. Discovery Education, connect to a world of learning.
Europe is a region with many countries. Its people speak several different languages and take pride in their unique regional and national traditions. However, there are several things that are shared by a majority of Europeans. Let's look at some of these common traits. Europeans place a high value on education. Children are required to attend school, and nearly everyone can read and write. In Germany, 99% of the population is literate. The percentage is 97% in Spain. School children usually learn to speak more than one language. This is important for communication in a region with many languages. Most European languages are part of the Indo-European language family and have several things in common, including use of the Latin alphabet. A majority of Europeans share the religious tradition of Christianity, and the continent is noted for the architecture of its many beautiful churches. However, mosques are also found in Europe, especially in countries such as Bosnia and Albania, where many people are Muslims. Europeans are very healthy as compared with people in many other parts of the world. They benefit from having plenty of nutritious food and very good medical facilities. Babies have an excellent chance of surviving to adulthood, and life expectancy is much higher than the world average. Most European countries are densely populated, but European populations as a whole are growing at a very slow rate. Some countries, such as Germany, have declining populations. The great majority of Europeans live in cities and towns of 10,000 or more people. In some countries, about 8 out of 10 people live in cities. Most Europeans enjoy a high standard of living compared to people in many other parts of the world. Although some people are better off than others, a majority have enough money for decent housing, cars, and vacation trips. European economies are highly industrialized. A large part of the labor force is employed in various sectors of industry, including sales and provision of services. Agriculture, although important, employs a much smaller percentage of the labor force than in many other parts of the world. Some agricultural work is still done by hand, but most European agriculture is highly mechanized. All forms of communication and transportation are well developed. People and goods can easily be moved from one place to another throughout the year. All European countries have democratically elected governments. And in the 21st century, a large number of European countries have formed a union that has established a single currency and lowered trade barriers. This has made it easy to travel from one member country to another. But Europe was not always this way. Let's take a look at the history of this remarkable part of the world. Simple stone tools found in archaeological sites indicate that humans have lived in Europe for thousands of years. Caves like these, in the Limoges region of France, have paintings of animals on the walls that were done 30,000 years ago. These early Europeans used stone tools and survived from hunting, fishing, and gathering wild plants. Then, about 8,000 years ago, farming methods based on domesticated plants and animals began spreading into Europe from Southwest Asia. Farm villages such as this recreation appeared in England by about 3500 BC. Groups of school children frequently visit this site to learn about life in England so long ago. Some of the early European farmers built stone monuments that can still be seen. Historians call these monuments megalithic because the stones were so large. Mega means large and lithic means stone. Here at Carnac in western France, you can see long rows of stones that must have had a very special significance to the local people. Other monuments appear to have been temples, perhaps used in rituals related to the sun and stars. The most impressive of these monuments still stands at Stonehenge in southern England. The adoption of farming methods provided much more food than hunting and gathering, so European populations grew rapidly. We can see ruins of cities that were built in western Turkey and Greece nearly 4,000 years ago. By the 5th century BC, beautiful temples were being built in Athens and other cities in Greece. The Greeks took their temple building skills and their culture to Sicily and southern Italy. From there, Greek ships sailed further west to establish colonies on the Mediterranean shores of southern France and eastern Spain. Rome began its rise to power toward the end of the first millennium BC. Roman legions conquered Europe as far north and west as England, where Hadrian's Wall marked the boundary between Roman Britain and the wild lands of the unconquered Scots. By the end of the 2nd century AD, the Roman Empire included all lands bordering the Mediterranean Sea and tied this vast area together in a single, legal, political, and economic system. Roman ships controlled the seas, and excellent roads made it easy to travel by land. Some well-built Roman bridges and aqueducts still stand after nearly 2,000 years. Throughout the former empire, you can still see the ruins of Roman cities. Rome, the heart of the empire, was the greatest of these cities. Modern Italy's capital surrounds the ruins of the ancient city. In the late 4th century, Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. By then, Rome's power was already in decline. Then, in the 5th century, the empire split into a western section focused on Rome and an eastern section ruled from Constantinople. The eastern part of the empire became the Byzantine Empire, but invasions and plagues plunged the western part of the empire into a dark age. The Roman Catholic Church, headed by the Bishop of Rome, or Pope, was one of the few institutions to survive this troubled period. Learning and Christian teachings were kept alive in the Celtic monasteries of remote Ireland and in Catholic monastic establishments founded on the continent. In the early 8th century, Muslim warriors from North Africa invaded Spain at Gibraltar. Treasures of Islamic architecture remain from the centuries during which parts of the Iberian Peninsula were under Muslim control. Other parts of Europe were attacked by Vikings from Scandinavia during the 9th and 10th centuries. Stone castles were built by Vikings who settled in the Normandy region of France and became the Normans. These Normans invaded England and won control of that land at the Battle of Hastings in 1066. The Crusades began toward the end of the 11th century as Europeans fought to win control of the Christian shrines in the Middle East from the Muslims. This period of contact between Christians and Muslims was often bloody, but it also resulted in the spread of many new ideas into Europe. The High Medieval period between about 1100 and the mid-14th century was an intensely creative time. Cities grew, trade flourished, and the roads were filled with pilgrims, merchants, and traveling scholars. Beautiful churches were built in the Romanesque style and later in the soaring Gothic style. This period ended in 1348 when bubonic plague, known as the Black Death, spread into Europe from Asia and killed a large part of the European population. Meanwhile, people in Florence and other Italian cities were developing new ways of looking at life as they rediscovered the intellectual and artistic achievements of ancient Greece and Rome. These new ideas and their spread out of Italy began a period that historians call the Renaissance. The invention of the printing press in the mid-15th century made it easier for these new ideas to spread. During the 15th century, European navigators began searching for a sea route to the riches of the East Indies. After many voyages of exploration, Portuguese navigators rounded the tip of Africa and reached India in 1498. Meanwhile, in 1492, Christopher Columbus convinced Spanish authorities that he could reach the Indies by sailing west across the Atlantic. Instead, he discovered the uncharted Americas and claimed the land for Spain. Soon the English, French, and Dutch were undertaking their own voyages of exploration and laying claim to newly discovered lands. As knowledge of the world increased, so did competition between various European states for control of global resources. New ideas also led some Europeans to question long-established beliefs. In the early 16th century, Martin Luther and other religious leaders advocated reforms in Roman Catholic practices. This call to reform led to the breaking up of Western Christendom into Catholic and Protestant branches. Many kings and princes used the reform movement as a justification for escaping the centralized religious authority represented by the Pope in Rome. Wars over religion broke out between Catholics and Protestants and lasted off and on through most of the 16th and 17th centuries. During an 18th century period known as the Age of Reason, European intellectuals promoted cosmopolitan and humanistic values. Toward the end of this century, in 1789, the French Revolution began with a cry from the people for liberty, equality, and fraternity. This revolution marked a major change in the course of European history. The French dictator, Napoleon Bonaparte, took power after the revolution. he dreamed of a united Europe under French control. Napoleon's defeat by the British at Waterloo in 1815 ended that dream. However, ideas generated by the French Revolution, coupled with the turmoil of the Napoleonic Wars, led to a rise in nationalism and a reaction against authoritarian monarchies. New countries emerged, including Germany, Italy, Greece, Belgium, and Norway. The coming of the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century brought about major socio-economic change. This revolution involved technological changes in manufacturing, transportation, and agriculture. Mechanization of farming processes resulted in many people leaving the farms and migrating to cities where there was work in the factories. But wages were low and unemployment was high. Many Europeans left their homelands to seek better opportunities in the Americas, Australia, and other parts of the world. Eventually, profits from the Industrial Revolution produced a growing European middle class whose influence increased throughout the 19th century. This middle class sought legislative change to promote democratic institutions and increase opportunities. Progress in education, advances in communications, and an increase in publications promoted the objectives of the middle class. Meanwhile, the European countries continued to expand their colonies in other parts of the world, usually in competition with each other. In 1914, growing nationalistic tensions led to World War I. This war pitted the Germans and their allies against the British, French, and their allies and lasted for more than 4 years. After the United States entered the war on the British side, the Germans and their allies were defeated. Nearly 10 million soldiers from all the nations involved died before the war ended in 1918. World War I seriously crippled Europe's economies. During the troubled 1920s and 30s, authoritarian governments seized power in several European countries. Germany's Adolf Hitler and other dictators blamed social and economic problems on communists, Jews, and other minority groups. In the late 1930s, Hitler began to annex German-speaking territories in Central Europe. His invasion of Poland in September 1939 led to the beginning of the Second World War. After nearly 5 years of conflict, the war in Europe ended with German defeat in May 1945. At the end of the war, confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union led to a division of Europe into Eastern and Western blocs. The Soviet Union, dominated by Joseph Stalin, established Soviet-controlled communist governments throughout much of Central and Eastern Europe, including Eastern Germany. As the Cold War deepened, the eastern and western parts of Europe were partitioned by an iron curtain of high fences and walls. Recovery from the war was slow in Soviet-controlled areas. Damage to buildings was still evident in Eastern Germany 45 years after the war. Western Europe, however, began a rapid recovery with economic help from the United States. Several Western European countries became increasingly multinational after people from former colonies migrated there in the aftermath of independence movements in Africa and Asia. Awareness of the need for a larger economic unit led to the formation of international organizations that eventually led to the creation of the European Community in 1967 and the European Union in 1992. The fences and walls that had divided Europe were pulled down in 1989 as the Cold War ended and more countries could join the European Union. 21st century Europe is now benefiting from increased social and economic cooperation. Europe is a region with many different countries, cultures, and languages. Its people are well educated, and a majority can afford a comfortable style of life. Europe has a rich and varied history, but one that was often marked by conflicts between countries. Today, most countries have joined the European Union, an organization that is leading the way toward a peaceful and prosperous future.